They say blood is thicker than water, but they never tell you how easily blood can turn cold. I sat in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Outside, the rain was pouring down, blurring the bright lights of my sister's massive suburban home. I looked at the dashboard clock. It had taken me exactly 3 hours and 42 minutes to drive here. 3 hours of navigating through heavy traffic, blinding rain, and a pit of anxiety growing in my stomach. On the passenger seat next to me sat a small, plainly wrapped cardboard box. It wasn't tied with a fancy silk ribbon. It didn't come from a luxury boutique store. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a piece of ordinary twine. To anyone looking through the window, it looked like trash. But to me, it was everything. It held the weight of a 10-year secret. It held the truth about our family. I took a deep breath, picked up the box, and stepped out into the pouring rain. When I reached the front porch, I could hear the music and laughter from inside. My sister Vanessa was celebrating her 30th birthday. Vanessa was the golden child. Beautiful, successful, and married to a wealthy corporate lawyer, she lived in a world of marble countertops, designer shoes, and expensive galas. I, on the other hand, was just Maya, the quiet younger sister who stayed behind in our small hometown, working a modest job at the local library, taking care of our sick mother until her final breath. I knocked on the heavy mahogany door. When it opened, Vanessa stood there. She was wearing a stunning emerald green dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She held a glass of expensive champagne in one hand. When her eyes fell on me, her smile didn't reach her eyes. Instead, she looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my wet jacket and my cheap, rain-soaked shoes. "Maya," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "You actually made it. I thought you'd use the storm as an excuse to stay in your little apartment." "I wouldn't miss your milestone birthday, Vanessa," I said, trying to force a smile. I stepped inside the warm, grand foyer. The scent of expensive catering and high-end perfume hit me instantly. "Well, come in, I suppose," Vanessa said, turning her back to me before I could even take off my coat. "Put your things in the closet, and please, try not to drip water all over the hardwood floors. Julian just had them resealed." I stood there for a moment, holding the damp cardboard box against my chest. No hug, no "how was the drive?" No recognition of the fact that I had saved up gas money just to make this trip. I was an embarrassment to her, an uninvited ghost from a past she desperately wanted to forget. I walked into the living room, where dozens of her wealthy friends were chatting and sipping wine. In the corner of the room stood a massive table completely piled high with gifts. There were boxes from Tiffany Company, large bags with Chanel logos, and envelopes stuffed with luxury travel vouchers. Vanessa was standing by the table, holding court with a group of her friends. I walked over, feeling out of place in my simple sweater and jeans. "Happy birthday, Vanessa," I said quietly, holding out the brown paper box. "This is for you." The conversation around the table suddenly stopped. Vanessa looked at the box in my hands as if I were holding a piece of garbage. One of her friends, a woman draped in diamonds, stifled a giggle behind her wine glass. "Oh," Vanessa said, making no effort to hide the smirk on her face. "What is this, Maya? Did you stop at a shipping yard on your way here? You drove 3 whole hours. For this?" A few people laughed softly. My cheeks burned with humiliation. I could feel the eyes of 30 strangers burning into me, judging me, pitying me. "It's not about the wrapping, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "It's what's inside. It's important. Our mother wanted you to have it." At the mention of our mother, Vanessa's eyes hardened. Our mother had passed away 6 months ago after a long, grueling battle with illness. Vanessa had barely visited. She claimed she was too busy with her husband's corporate events, too busy with her high society life. She had skipped the funeral entirely, sending a massive arrangement of expensive lilies instead. She thought money could buy her way out of grief and guilt. "Mom is gone, Maya," Vanessa snapped coldly, her voice sharp enough to cut. And frankly, her taste in things wasn't exactly modern. "But thank you. Just toss it on the table. If it doesn't get lost under the real gifts, maybe I'll open it later." She didn't even take it from my hands. She just pointed to the edge of the table. I slowly walked over and placed the humble brown box right next to a gleaming, oversized silver box wrapped in a silk bow. As I walked away, I heard Vanessa whisper to her friend, "I swear, she does this on purpose, just to embarrass me. A brown paper box, it looks like a bomb threat." More laughter followed. I stood in the corner of the room, completely alone, watching my sister bask in the adoration of people who only loved her for her money. But as I looked at her laughing, a cold, calm feeling washed over me. She thought she was sitting on top of the world. She thought she had successfully erased her past, abandoned her family, and built an empire of lies. But she didn't know what was inside that brown box. She didn't know about the letter tucked safely beneath the velvet lining, and she had no idea that tonight, her perfect, golden life was about to come crashing down. To understand why Vanessa hated me so much, and why she felt so comfortable humiliating me in front of her friends, you have to understand our past. We didn't grow up in a mansion. We grew up in a tiny, two-bedroom house on the edge of a fading industrial town. Our father left us when we were young, leaving our mother, Evelyn, to raise two girls on a meager waitress's salary. From the time we were children, Vanessa was different. She hated our life. She hated the second-hand clothes we wore. She hated the smell of fried food that clung to our mother's uniform. And most of all, she hated me. Because I was younger, our mother often spent what little extra time she had helping me with schoolwork or comforting me when I was sick. Vanessa saw this as a personal insult. In her mind, every dollar spent on my asthma medication or my school supplies was a dollar stolen from her beauty pageants and designer dreams. As we grew older, Vanessa's resentment turned into something toxic. When Vanessa turned 18, she met Julian. Julian was older, wealthy, and came from a prominent family in the city. He was everything Vanessa ever wanted, a ticket out of poverty. But Julian's family was deeply traditional and snobbish. They looked down on working-class people. Vanessa knew this. So, she did the unthinkable. She began to invent a completely new life story. She told Julian and his parents that our mother was a wealthy, eccentric recluse who lived abroad, and that she, Vanessa, had been raised by boarding schools and private tutors. She completely erased our reality. I remember the night she told us. It was a week before she was set to move to the city with Julian. She sat our mother down at our old, chipped kitchen table. "You can't come to the wedding," Vanessa had said flatly, not even looking our mother in the eye. Our mother's hands shook as she held her coffee mug. "What do you mean, Vanessa? I'm your mother. Julian's family thinks I come from money," Vanessa said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. "If they see this house, if they see you in your waitress uniform, they will ruin his career, and they will call off the wedding. I have worked too hard to get out of this dump to let your poverty pull me back down." I stepped forward, furious. "How can you say that to her? She worked double shifts for years, just so you could have piano lessons and nice dresses for prom. She sacrificed her health for you." Vanessa finally looked at me, her eyes filled with pure venom. "Shut up, Maya. You're just jealous because you're going to spend the rest of your life rotting in this town just like her. If either of you shows up at my wedding, if either of you contacts Julian's family, I will make sure the police remove you for harassment. As far as I'm concerned, I don't have a family anymore." She packed her bags and left the next morning. Our mother didn't cry in front of Vanessa, but that night I heard her sobbing in her bedroom. It was a deep, guttural sound of a mother whose heart had been shattered into pieces by the child she loved more than life itself. Shortly after Vanessa left, our mother fell ill. The years of working long hours on her feet, skipping meals, and suppressing her stress took their toll. She was diagnosed with a severe progressive heart condition. The medical bills began to pile up instantly. I reached out to Vanessa. I called her multiple times, leaving desperate voicemails. "Mom is sick. The medication is too expensive. We need help. Please, Vanessa." No response. A month later, I received a formal letter in the mail. It wasn't from Vanessa. It was from a law firm representing her husband, Julian. The letter stated that my repeated phone calls constituted harassment, and that if I attempted to contact Vanessa or her husband again, they would file a restraining order and sue me for damages. They even attached a check for $500, a pathetic, insulting handout with a note that read, "This is the final settlement. Do not contact us again." Our mother saw the letter. She forbade me from cashing the check. Instead, she tore it into pieces. For the next 10 years, I became our mother's sole caregiver. I put my own life on hold. I gave up my dreams of going to a top university out of state. I took a low-paying job at the local library because the hours were flexible enough for me to take Mom to her chemotherapy and physical therapy sessions. I watched our mother slowly fade away, her body shrinking, her breath growing weaker by the day. Through all those years of pain, Vanessa lived a life of absolute luxury. I saw her on social media, traveling to Paris, attending charity galas, buying a $1 million home. She never once called to ask if our mother was alive or dead. When Mom's condition became terminal 6 months ago, she called me to her bedside. She was hooked up to oxygen machines, her skin pale and translucent. She held my hand with what little strength she had left. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the medical monitors. "In the bottom drawer of my closet, there is a small metal lockbox. I want you to take it." "What is it, Mom?" I asked, wiping a tear from my eye. It is the truth, she said, coughing weakly. When I'm gone, I want you to take what is inside that box, put it in a gift wrapping, and I want you to deliver it to Vanessa on her 30th birthday. Promise me, Maya, promise me you will give it to her in front of everyone. I promise, Mom, I wept. A few hours later, her heart stopped beating. After the funeral, which Vanessa never bothered to attend, I opened the metal lockbox. Inside, I found something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't a piece of cheap jewelry. It wasn't a sentimental family photo. It was a legal document, an old diary, and a handwritten letter addressed directly to Vanessa. As I read through the contents of that box, the missing pieces of our family history finally clicked into place. I realized that Vanessa's entire life, her wealth, her status, her marriage to Julian, was built on a massive, terrifying lie. And more importantly, I realized that our mother had given me the ultimate weapon to destroy her. I spent 6 months planning. I waited patiently for Vanessa's 30th birthday. I knew she would throw a massive party. I knew she would invite the elite of society, and I knew that would be the perfect stage for her downfall. Back in the present, the party was reaching its peak. The catering staff was clearing away the dinner plates, and the acoustic band in the corner began to play a soft, elegant tune. Julian, Vanessa's husband, stood up and tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The room fell silent. Julian was a tall, sharply dressed man with a polished smile, but his eyes were always calculating, always looking for a business advantage. Everyone, if I could have your attention, Julian said, his deep voice echoing through the grand living room. Tonight, we celebrate the most beautiful, elegant, and sophisticated woman I know, my wife, Vanessa. She comes from a legacy of quiet dignity, and she has brought that same grace into my life. To celebrate her 30th year, I think it's time we open the gifts from the people who love her most. The crowd applauded. Vanessa beamed, kissing Julian on the cheek before sitting gracefully on a velvet armchair in the center of the room. 2 of her friends began bringing the gifts to her one by one. She opened a box from Tiffany's, a diamond bracelet. The crowd gasped in admiration. She opened a designer handbag from Italy. More clapping. Vanessa accepted each gift with the practiced humility of a queen receiving tributes from her subjects. Then, her friend Sarah reached the end of the table. She picked up the damp brown cardboard box tied with twine. She looked at it with a disgusted expression, holding it by the string as if it were contaminated. Vanessa, Sarah said loudly, ensuring the entire room could hear. There's still this one left. The one your sister brought. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted from admiration to awkward amusement. People began whispering to one another. Vanessa's face tightened. She looked over at me, sitting alone on a wooden chair near the kitchen entrance. Her eyes were filled with warning. Oh, just put it aside, Sarah, Vanessa said quickly, trying to laugh it off. We can open that later. It's probably just some old knitted socks or something from a thrift store. No, Vanessa, I said, standing up from my chair. My voice was loud, clear, and perfectly calm. Every head in the room turned to look at me. Open it now. You promised Mom you would open her gifts, didn't you? Oh, wait. You weren't there when she passed away. But I'm telling you now, this was her dying wish. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Julian frowned, looking from me to Vanessa. The mention of a dying mother made it impossible for Vanessa to brush it off without looking completely heartless in front of her high society friends. Julian cleared his throat. Vanessa, darling, if it was your mother's final wish, perhaps you should open it. We don't want anyone thinking we lack family values. Vanessa glared at me, a silent promise of murder in her eyes, but she forced a fake, trembling smile for her guests. Of course, how sweet. Bring it over, Sarah. Sarah dropped the brown box into Vanessa's lap. Vanessa didn't use a beautiful gold letter opener for this one. She ripped the brown paper off aggressively, her manicured nails tearing through the cardboard. She opened the lid of the box, expecting to find something embarrassing, like an old sweater or a cheap photo frame. Inside the box sat a battered old leather-bound journal, a set of folded legal documents with official state seals, and a single white envelope with the words, "To Vanessa," written in our mother's elegant cursive handwriting. Vanessa picked up the journal, frowning. What is this? An old diary? Maya, is this some kind of joke? It's not a joke, Vanessa, I said, taking a few steps closer to the center of the room. Open the envelope first, read the note. Read it out loud so everyone can hear what a loving family we are. I am not reading this garbage out loud, Vanessa hissed under her breath, her face turning bright red. Read it, Vanessa, Julian whispered sharply, leaning down toward her. People are staring. Just read a line or two so we can move on. Vanessa swallowed hard. With shaking hands, she slid her finger under the flap of the white envelope and pulled out the letter. She unfolded it. I watched her face closely. At first, her expression was one of pure annoyance, but as her eyes scanned the first few lines of our mother's handwriting, the annoyance vanished. It was replaced by a sudden, jarring look of shock. Her breath caught in her throat. The color completely drained from her lips, leaving her skin a ghostly, sickly white. Vanessa? Julian asked, noticing the sudden change in his wife. What does it say? Vanessa didn't answer. She couldn't. Her hands began to tremble so violently that the paper rattled in her grip. She stared at the letter as if she were looking at a ghost. Vanessa, read it, Julian demanded, his voice losing its patient tone. He reached down and snatched the letter right out of her frozen hands. If you won't read it, I will. Julian, no, don't! Vanessa suddenly shrieked, reaching up to grab the paperback, but she was too late. Julian stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the letter. He began to read out loud, his professional lawyer's voice echoing through the silent, terrified room. My dearest Vanessa, happy 30th birthday. By the time you read this, I will be gone, and you will be a wealthy woman. But you need to know the truth about where your wealth actually came from. You told your husband and the world that you abandoned me because I was poor. But the truth is, I am not your biological mother, and the money you are living on right now belongs to the sister you despised. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Julian stopped reading, his eyes widening in absolute horror. He looked down at Vanessa, then over at me. What? What is the meaning of this? Julian stammered, his polished demeanor completely shattering. Vanessa fell back into her velvet chair, her hands covering her face, and then, just as the title of this story promises, she began to cry. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated terror, because she knew that the secret was finally out. The grand living room, just moments ago filled with the clinking of champagne glasses and polite laughter, was now as silent as a graveyard. Julian stood frozen, the letter trembling in his hand. His eyes darted from the paper to his sobbing wife and finally to me. Vanessa, Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low whisper. What is this? Is this some kind of sick joke your family is playing? Vanessa couldn't answer. She kept her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently. She knew that any word she spoke right now could dig her grave even deeper. I stepped forward, taking the center stage of her pristine, $1,000,000 living room. All eyes turned to me. I wasn't the quiet, timid little sister anymore. It's no joke, Julian, I said, my voice echoing clearly. Since Vanessa won't speak, let me explain it to you. If you look at the legal documents beneath that journal, you'll see the official state adoption records from 30 years ago. Julian quickly reached into the brown box, pulling out the folded papers with the official gold seals. His eyes scanned the text rapidly, his legal training kicking in. I watched his face turn from confusion to absolute rage as he read the aims and the dates. 30 years ago, I continued. Our mother, Evelyn, was working as a private live-in nurse for a very wealthy woman in the city, a woman named Beatrice Vance. Beatrice was from an old money family, but she was deeply lonely and terribly ill. She had a daughter out of wedlock, a child she desperately wanted to protect from her own greedy, conniving relatives who were waiting for her to pass away so they could steal her estate. The crowd leaned in, hanging on every single word. Vanessa finally dropped her hands from her face. Her makeup was ruined, black mascara running down her pale cheeks. Maya, please, stop, she whimpered, her voice cracking. Don't do this. Not here. I ignored her, looking straight at Julian. Beatrice Vance died just a few weeks after giving birth. In her final will and testament, which is right there in your hands, Julian, she left her entire secret offshore trust fund to her newborn daughter. But to keep the child safe from her predatory family, she made a deal with her trusted nurse. Our mother, Evelyn, legally adopted that baby girl, changed her name, and raised her as her own daughter in our small hometown. Julian's breath hitched. He looked down at the document, his thumb running over the biological mother's name, Beatrice Vance, and then he looked at the child's registered name upon adoption, Vanessa. Yes, Julian, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. Your sophisticated, high society wife is actually the sole heir to the Vance estate. She isn't the daughter of an eccentric European billionaire like she told you, but she was born into massive wealth. Our mother kept that trust fund completely hidden, letting it grow for decades, waiting until Vanessa turned 30 to hand over the coordinates and keys to the account. Mom wanted to ensure Vanessa was mature enough to handle it. Julian looked at Vanessa, a flicker of relief crossing his face for a split second. So she is wealthy. She didn't lie about having an inheritance? Oh, she lied about everything else. I laughed softly. But here is the real twist, Julian, the part Vanessa didn't wait to find out. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the battered leather journal. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the worn fabric. Vanessa was so eager to escape our poor life, I told the room, that she abandoned the only woman who ever protected her. When she left us 10 years ago, she didn't just break our mother's heart, she broke a legal condition. Vanessa snapped her head up, her eyes wide with a new kind of panic. What condition? She whispered. I opened the journal to a marked page. This is our mother's personal diary. She detailed every single conversation she had with your biological mother, Beatrice. You see, Beatrice Vance was terrified that her daughter would grow up to be greedy, heartless, and cruel, just like the relatives she was running from. So, she put a very specific clause in the trust fund legal framework. I handed the journal to Julian, pointing to a highlighted section under a legal amendment page. Read it, Julian. You're the lawyer, I said. Julian's eyes raced across the page. As he read, his face went completely blank. The legal paper in his other hand slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the expensive hardwood floor. It says, Julian stammered, his voice losing all its power. It says the inheritance is contingent upon the character and moral standing of the heir to be evaluated by the guardian. If the heir abandons, neglects, or publicly shames the adoptive family, then the guardian has the sole legal right to reassign the beneficiary. Exactly, I said, turning to Vanessa. Mom spent 10 years waiting for you to call. She spent 10 years hoping you would change your mind, that you would visit her in the hospital or at least ask how she was doing. Even when your husband's lawyers threatened us with lawsuits and restraining orders, Mom still held out hope. She kept the trust keys ready for you. I took a deep breath, remembering the cold, lonely nights in the hospital, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor while Vanessa was out partying in the city. But then, 6 months ago, when Mom was on her deathbed, she finally realized the truth. You were never going to come back. You had completely erased us. You let her die alone. And so, using the legal power granted to her by Beatrice Vance, our mother officially signed the reassignment papers. I pulled a final document out of my own jacket pocket and held it up for everyone to see. 3 days before she passed away, Evelyn legally transferred the entire Vance Trust Fund, worth an estimated $14 million. To me. The room erupted into a frenzy of whispers and gasps. Vanessa stood up so fast, her chair tipped backward, crashing onto the floor. No, that's impossible, she screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. It's my money. It belongs to my biological mother. You can't take it from me. You're just a miserable librarian. You ruined my life. You ruined your own life the day you decided that money was more important than family, Vanessa, I said calmly. You thought you were superior because you married into wealth and lived in a mansion built on lies. But the irony is, if you had shown just an ounce of compassion, if you had answered just one of my phone calls when Mom was sick, you would be sitting on a $14 million fortune today. Julian stood there, looking at his wife as if she were a complete stranger. The prestige, the high society background, the elegant legacy he had bragged about to his colleagues. It was all a beautifully constructed illusion, and worst of all, the massive fortune he thought he was securing by staying quiet was completely out of reach. Julian, honey, listen to me, Vanessa cried, reaching out to grab his arm. She's lying. The papers are fake. We can fight this in court. You're a lawyer. You can find a loophole. Julian coldly pulled his arm away from her grip. He looked around the room at his friends, his business partners, and his clients. Their faces were filled with disgust, mockery, and amusement. His reputation was ruined. The elite circle he worked so hard to maintain was watching his family unit implode in real time. Don't touch me, Vanessa, Julian said, his voice deadly quiet. You lied to me for 10 years. You told me your family died in a tragic accident abroad. You made me send legal threats to your own dying mother. You are a liability. He turned to his guests, forcing a tight, frozen smile. I apologize to everyone. The party is over. Please leave. Nobody needed to be told twice. The guests practically scrambled for the door, whispering and checking their phones, undoubtedly texting everyone they knew about the scandal of the century. Sarah, the friend who had mocked my brown box, couldn't even look me in the eye as she hurried past. Within 5 minutes, the massive house was completely empty, save for the three of us. I looked at Vanessa, who was sitting on the floor, surrounded by her torn birthday wrapping paper, sobbing uncontrollably. The diamond bracelet and the designer bags she was so proud of just minutes ago looked incredibly small and worthless now. "Why did you do this to me, Maya?" she wept, looking up at me with absolute hatred. "If you had the money, why couldn't you just keep it and leave me alone? Why did you have to humiliate me in front of everyone I know?" "Because you needed to feel exactly what you made Mom feel," I replied, looking down at her. "You humiliated her. You discarded her like trash because you were ashamed of her. I wanted you to lose everything in the exact same way, in front of the people whose opinions you value more than your own blood." I picked up my damp coat from the chair and walked toward the front door. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the grand, hollow mansion. "The lawyers will be contacting you and Julian next week," I said quietly. As the legal owner of the Vance estate, I also happen to own the ground lease this very house is built on. It turns out Julian's firm bought this property through a subsidiary funded by the Vance Trust. "You have 30 days to vacate the property." Vanessa froze, her jaw dropping open in sheer disbelief. Julian let out a dark, defeated laugh, slumping onto the couch, realizing there was absolutely no escape. I opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The rain had finally stopped, and the storm clouds were breaking away, revealing a clear, starry night sky. For the first time in 10 years, the heavy weight on my chest was completely gone. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal transitions. Julian filed for divorce immediately, citing fraud and misrepresentation. Because of the clear terms of their prenuptial agreement and the staggering public nature of her lies, Vanessa was left with absolutely nothing. She couldn't afford the lifestyle she had built, and her high society friends abandoned her overnight. Last I heard, she had moved into a tiny, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, working a mundane retail job just to pay rent. As for me, I didn't use the $14 million to buy luxury sports cars or mansions. I used a portion of it to build a state-of-the-art wing at our hometown hospital, the Evelyn Memorial Care Center, ensuring that no elderly or sick patient would ever have to suffer through illness alone because they couldn't afford treatment. I went back to my job at the local library because I truly loved the quiet peace of it. But now, I never have to worry about rent, gas money, or the future. As I sit on the porch of our mother's old house, watching the sunset, I think about the note she left in that brown cardboard box. The final line of her letter is something I will never forget, a lesson that everyone should carry with them. Wealth is not measured by the size of your house, the designer labels on your clothes, or the amount of money in your bank account. True wealth is found in the loyalty you show to the people who loved you when you had nothing. If you trade your soul and your family for a golden cage, you will eventually find yourself sitting alone in the dark, with nothing but your regrets to keep you warm. Vanessa thought she was opening a cheap, embarrassing gift from a poor sister, but in reality, she opened the mirror to her own soul, and she couldn't handle the reflection. Justice has a strange, quiet way of finding its path, and in the end, truth always outlasts the lie.